Coming up on Chasing the Natty, last week we released the 2025 Way Too Early CFF Mock Draft Special, where you heard analysis from 14 different experts as we kick off the 2025 season. This week, we're going to take another look at that very same draft, this time going round by round, discussing our main takeaways from the draft, as well as some of our favorite and least favorite picks from the draft. There's a ton to discuss, so let's get to it. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
Sauers picks his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching for the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. Touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the off season, at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campustocanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We have content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it's CFF, Devy, C2C, College IDP, Underdog Best Ball, College DFS. Really, if you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to show the support to the show directly, you can take things even further. You can go over to campustocanton.com, and when you sign up for one of our yearly memberships, excluding our C2C Winning Edge package, you can use the promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, you can always show us some love by leaving a comment, a like, a subscribe on a YouTube side of things. And if you're on the podcast side of things, you can leave a 5-star review. Make sure you're following the show. Not only does that show us support, but it also shows the game of college fantasy in general some support. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow joining me today is Mr. Ethan Sauers. Ethan over on Blue Sky at ethansauers.bluesky.whatever they make you put in that super long tag that Blue Sky has you do. Have they fixed that yet? I always found that annoying about Blue Sky.
They have. You can link a website and get rid of that .bluesky.social.
Okay, gotcha.
A little unappealing.
Yeah, but Ethan, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Again, we're obviously us in the CFF world. We're getting excited, kicking off the season here. Already a couple of best ball drafts are getting going, thanks to the likes of Insider CFF running one right now that I'm in. Ryan Carpenter at CarpG926, I think he is on Twitter. He's running his already. He's got a couple going already. So people are excited, man. Again, obviously this draft we're going to take a look at is the first of the year. Definitely the first expert one for sure. Bringing in all these different guys and everything. We're not here to discuss who took what in this episode here today. Again, if you guys want to go check that out, you can go check out the special where all of those experts will talk about their picks and stuff like that. We're just mostly reacting to the draft position of the different players, right? Kind of getting a feel as to where these players are going. Do we think they stay in this spot, or is it this like a one draft only thing? Ethan, you've gotten a glimpse at this draft so far, but you haven't really taken a deep dive into it. There's going to be a lot of natural reaction from you today. But as you've kind of prepared for the 2025 CFF season, what are some things that have stuck out to you in your preparation so far?
Yeah, it's a little weird for me this year. I'm definitely not as far into it at this point this year as I was at this time last year. I think I was already drafting at this time last year. I haven't yet jumped into any drafts. Chris K and I are working on some underdog prep for the big tournaments they run over there with Ballin' with My Bestie on the C2C podcast network. So we're digging in really on the P4 level. That's where most of my research has been spent, just prepping for some of those episodes where we have been looking at just like archetypes for
Hmm.
players that did well in Underdog in the 2024 season. So for me, I haven't gotten a whole lot into like ADP necessarily, but really starting to try and flesh out my positional rankings and just get an idea. As everybody knows who has, if they listened last week, I did listen to a little bit of what you guys were doing. I didn't want to get too far into it, be able to give you some genuine reaction here, but it's impossible to even listen to the first two or three guys and not have the takeaway of, this is kind of the Wild West this year with
Hmm.
returning players. Not a whole lot of returning production outside of quarterback. So it's a lot of fun. This season, I believe 2 or 3 seasons ago we had a season similar to this, and they're fun because it's almost like a whole reset that you have going into things. But it really does pay off those who are grinding away on, February 16th, 17th of an off season. You make sure to get plenty of time to learn these new names and um, a few surprises once you hear, the beat reporters start banging their drums later this spring.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I can't wait to find out some of the guys that I'm taking in like the 10th round of drafts right now. It's like, oh, turns out they're just not even involved at all.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
I think for me, something I have to get used to more this year is just being okay with risk. Right? You're gonna like a lot of the guys that felt like they should have been going in, round 20 plus last year. You're gonna have to start looking at guys like that in like the round 10 range because there's just so little coming back that is so proven, right? And even guys that are being taken in like the first 5 rounds. Now, again, some of it I'll kind of call out here today as like I personally still wouldn't take that risk. I think there's enough proven guys that are worth like being taken in the first 5 rounds. I'll probably take over some of these guys, but
Yeah.
like I'm like looking at the best ball draft I'm in right now, and I'm just sitting there thinking just how few of these guys are already getting into like the sixth, seventh, eighth round, where it's like, all right, outside, especially outside of quarterback, like quarterbacks, yeah, there's a ton of proven production coming back from last year, but running back, wide receiver, boy, you got to be real. You got to be real okay with kind of sticking to your guns on certain guys and everything like that, and kind of understand there's not really much of an ADP game to be played there right now. You just kind of got to, especially this early on, like just draft the
For
guys
sure.
you want to draft and go from there.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense.
So yeah, we'll get to it here again. Basically, the format of this show, we're gonna go round by round. Um, like I said, Ethan, you've glimpsed at the draft. You listened to a little bit of the special last week, but you haven't
Yeah.
really like sat down. You don't have like a ton of notes here or anything like that
No.
to fall back on or anything like that, which is great because again, I want genuine reaction from you. We'll go round by round. I'll list off all the names, especially for you podcast only listeners out there. Love you guys. Want to make sure you guys are taken care of. And then afterwards, Ethan, I'll just kind of get your general thoughts, and then we'll probably pick a favorite pick out of each round and a least favorite pick out of each round.
Awesome.
So
Sounds great.
let's hit up round one. Excuse me. Let's try that again. Not this time. Not with a bubble in my throat. Let's start out with round one here. And round one, the 101 pick of the first CFF mock draft of the season is Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver out of Ohio State. He was followed up by Mekhi Hughes, the former Tulane running back headed to Oregon. Then we have Arch Manning, the quarterback out of Texas at 103. At 104, we got Darius Taylor, the running back out of Minnesota. At 105, we have Jordan Tyson, the wide receiver out of Arizona State. Excuse me. At 106, we got Bryson Washington, the running back out of Baylor. At 107, Isaac Brown, the running back out of Louisville. At 108, Desmond Reed, the running back out of Pitt. At 109, Anthony Hankerson, the running back out of Oregon State. At 110, we have Lenore Sellers, the quarterback out of South Carolina. At 111, we have Ryan Williams, the standout true freshman wide receiver at Alabama last year. And then finally, the draft or the round is finished up with Jeremiah Love, running back out of Notre Dame. So, Ethan, looking at this first round, what are your general thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, pretty obvious opening with Jeremiah Smith. With the wide receiver returning production as questionable as it is, I totally get it. I do wonder a little bit on what that offense is going to look like this year with a new quarterback and really replacing just about everything except Jeremiah Smith this year. Um, but in general, the running backs really just dominating that first round. It seems like we're going to get first rounds that look a lot like this. Yeah, pretty well into spring, I think. So I think this is a good representation of what we're going to be looking at, even as things start to develop a little bit. Um, I I look at like Jordan Tyson, and I hope that he's healthy for the
Hmm.
start of the year. It's definitely kind of like a Ted McMillan situation with last year, where you have this guy who's the de facto, one or two receiver heading into the season. But there's definitely injury concerns. I'd say probably this time last year, heavier injury concerns for Jordan Tyson than we saw for Tet. So there is a little bit of wondering. But when we're this early, you've got to assume health for all of these
Yeah.
guys. You've got to assume that these guys are going to be healthy. So I don't hate that at all. Um, I'd say probably the biggest, surprise on this list is probably Arch Manning at 1.03. Um, it seems pretty rich for a quarterback at the jump here. Um, but it's hard to hate on it because he is more mobile than Quinn. And he's in a quarterback friendly system with
Yep.
Sark. So I mean, obviously round one, there's going to be a reason why everyone picked all of these guys, but he's probably the one that jumps out at me as like a little bit eye-popping
Hmm.
to say on that.
Yeah, I would say my general thoughts on round one is they kind of mirror yours in a lot of ways, where the running backs definitely dominate here. Again, we have 7 out of the first 12 picks are running backs, and I'm already telling you in the first couple drafts I'm in already, they're like best balls. They're even more heavy running back. I think people are very quickly realizing that one, you can wait on quarterback just a little bit. There's a lot of proven production coming back at quarterback, and then two, like both running back and wide receiver, right? You are okay, or there's not a lot of proven production coming back, right? So you might think to yourself like, oh, then like they should be kind of treated the same. Late running backs versus late wide receivers are two very different games, right? Wide receiver is already a very volatile position,
Yeah.
and so when you get guys like Jeremiah Smith that feel like very rare week to week producers, then yeah, you're going to take them round one. Jordan Tyson, you assume he's full health, yeah, he's a round one kind of guy running, but your round three wide receivers versus your round 11. I'm not saying there's a huge difference. There's a
Yeah.
clearly reason why they're going so much ahead of them, but like at the same time, like you understand with wide receivers that you're going to have several dud weeks, right? Because that's just the nature of the position, right? It's going to vary game to game more than say running backs. Running backs, like if you can nail down some top end guys that you're going to get production every single week, that's great, and you're not going to get that in a lot of your later round guys unless you like go after a lot of these rooms that are heavily up in the air, and even then you could end up with a back in a committee, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are going to want to nail down these running backs early, especially the few proven that are coming back, guys like Darius Taylor, Bryson Washington, Desmond Reed, Anthony Hankerson, Jeremiah Love. Like you'll see as this draft kind of goes along, like the position falls off a cliff at one point.
I'm pretty sure the top 12 fantasy point per game running backs from last year have all left. I think Mekhi Hughes is coming in as like, from what I saw with
Oh
Kay
yeah.
on some research,
So
Hughes was like running back 13 points per game.
so yeah, so I have my rankings or my in season stats from last year pulled up here, and of the top 24 running backs, only 3 returned to the same team from last year.
Wow. That's impressive.
And you got 4 that have transferred to new teams. So that's Mekhi Hughes, CJ Campbell, Ahmad Hardy, Dean Connors.
Yeah.
Everyone else went off to the NFL. Like
Wow.
it's a massive reset of the position. Now
Yeah.
and then once you get into like 25 through 36, that's where you see some of these early guys, right? Desmond Reed, Darius Taylor, Bryson Washington, Isaac Brown, especially some of these guys that had really good second half of seasons,
Yeah.
right? So
The guy that jumps out that I'd like to pick your brain on a little bit on.
of course,
Anthony Hankerson jumped out at me a little bit. Like I was shocked, and then I kind of like I looked at it for a little bit, and I was like, well, after Griffin went down, he was a workhorse, and so like he's
Griffin's
definitely
gone.
established there. And I kind of found myself like, maybe that's a little late for Hankerson even. Like,
So
I think it's a
there's like
good
a
pick.
couple of things, right? Like Hankerson, one, even with Griffin, like Hankerson was dominating, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm looking at him here, like yeah, fantasy points per game. Where'd he go? Yeah, fantasy points per game through week 9, he was RB12. He actually fell off a little bit towards the end of the season. Now, and I picked Chris Moxley's brain on that just a little bit, and he said that there were some offensive line injuries, and they have no depth along the offensive line. And
that's
so
fair.
that kind of caused a lot of problems towards the end of the season. That's why Hankerson kind of fell off from RB12 in fantasy points per game, and he finished as RB22 fantasy points per game. But even still, like Hankerson, like even with Griffin there, was doing really, really well. Griffin's gone now, so the backfield is totally Hankerson's there. I think Hankerson's a great pick there. My personal favorite of this round is actually the guy that came off one pick after my pick in this round. I hate myself for not taking him, and that's Desmond Reed, man. Desmond Reed at 1-8 is a monster pick by I think it was John Lobb who made that pick. Reed's my RB1 for the year. And again, that sounds crazy
Yeah.
because I took Isaac Brown ahead of him, but like I just didn't have my rankings ready at this time. But like Reed's my RB1 for this year. He was RB14 in fantasy points per game. That's the highest among all returning backs from last year. This dude had 64 targets on top of 152 rushing attempts. Like 64 targets is an insane number for a running back. That's with him missing week 14. Like he's a PPR dream.
Yeah,
Year 2 in Pitt, same OC, same quarterback, same easy
yeah,
schedule in the ACC there. Like I think Reed's pretty much locked in for a top 12 finish.
yeah. I love the Reed pick. I'd hate to give Chris K any more credit than he already is receiving, but Kay pointed out earlier this season that 49% of Reed's fantasy points came from receiving. That's compared to LaQuint Allen at 36% of his fantasy points. And that only 11% of Reed's fantasy points came from touchdowns.
Yeah.
So like you assume the touchdown variance is going to kick in and in his favor. Like, yeah, Desmond Reed to the moon for sure. I think that's a phenomenal pick by, John Lobb, who makes phenomenal picks. So
And then I'll go with my least favorite pick here real quick. You kind of touched on it already, and that is Arch Manning at 1-3. I get why people think Arch Manning can finish higher than, where yours finished last year at QB 69. Like you said, he's
yeah,
dual threat ability. He's looked better in the few starts that he's had so far. But with how much quarterback value there is later on in the draft, I just think really taking any quarterback in the top 3 picks is just a massive mistake this year. I personally don't think I can bring myself to take any quarterback in the first. Yeah, I'd say probably first 2 rounds, which sucks because there's a guy that goes in the second round in this draft, and he's pretty consistently gone in the second round in other drafts that I really like, but like I don't think I'll be able to bring myself to with positional value. I don't think I'll be able to bring myself to them. What about you? Any picks stand out to you that you feel a little icky about?
um, I mean it's pretty standard. Uh, I do think Mekhi Hughes is a little bit rich for my taste. Being the first running back off the board, I'd probably take, Darius Taylor and Bryson Washington over him. Probably would take Desmond Reed as well. I know that there's like consistency with Oregon using the players that are talented and being able to get like production from them. And there's no doubt Mekhi Hughes is, I would say he's one of the more talented guys in this, in college football this year and at running back. Um, but Jordan James, even I think he ended up finishing, outside of the top 24 in fantasy points last year, and just seemed,
He
you
was
know,
RB23 in total points and RB28 in fantasy points per game.
okay, there we go. Um, so yeah, like it seems like they were a little bit insistent on a committee. I think Noah Whittington is back, and we'll get a little bit of work. That's not a huge thing. And then I believe they had a freshman or a sophomore. They had an underclassman that has been looking pretty good. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I don't think that Mekhi Hughes is a slam dunk. And at 1.02, I want a little bit more security, especially in the running back landscape of this year.
Normally, I'm very hesitant about G5 to power forward transfers just in general. So like this isn't anything new for me. But I agree with you. I think it's a little too high to take him in the first round. I still have him in my top 10 RBs because again, one, there's so much variability at running back this year that a power forward or G5 to power forward transfer is going to end up higher than they normally will because there's just far less proven production. But I still think that proven production goes ahead of a guy like Mekhi Hughes. Even if I do love the system, even if I do love the talent, it's still a new situation compared to where he was last year, right? Darius Taylor, Bryson Washington, Isaac Brown, Desmond Reed, Anthony Hankerson, Jeremiah Love. I would have all of those guys ahead of Mekhi Hughes, in my opinion. I think, like you said, it's just a little rich for me taking him in the first 2 picks, let alone I would say even the first half of the first round easily. So I think it depends on where you take them ends up depending on, what does the first round look like? If running backs are flying off the board, I can't fault somebody for taking him at like 1-9 when the first 8 running backs ahead of him go off the board in the first 9 picks, right? But if it's not a running back heavy first round, and you're getting guys like or you get Tyson, you get Williams, you get Smith here in the first round, I would say I'd be more comfortable taking him in the second round. Speaking of the second round, you had a thought?
Oh, I was just going to say Jaden Lamar was the freshman running back that I thinking of. So, but yeah, just a little. We're picking nits here with the first round.
Oh yeah, these are all good. These are all good guys, like no doubt. Let's see what we got in round 2 though. In round 2, at the 2-1 pick, we have Mr. DJ Lagway, quarterback out of Florida. We have at the 202 Dylan Edwards, the running back out of Kansas State. At 203, we have Denzel Boston, the wide receiver out of Washington. At 204, Deion Burks, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma. At 205, Jaheim White, the running back out of West Virginia. At 26, Jonah Coleman, the running back out of Washington. At 27, Antonio Williams, the wide receiver out of Clemson. At 2-8, CJ Campbell, the running back formerly out of Florida Atlantic, now at Rutgers. At 2-9, Damon Williams, the quarterback out of Washington. At 2-10, Nicholas Singleton, the running back out of Penn State. At 2-11, Mr. Justice Haynes, the former running back out of Alabama, now at Michigan. And at 2-12, Mr. Damon Claiborne, the running back out of Wake Forest. So, Ethan, glancing at this list here, what are your kind of general thoughts?
I don't want to get too caught up with quarterback because we kind of already touched on that and done. DJ Lagway at the top there is I think the one name that kind of jumps out to me that makes me a little bit that's in this group is DeMond Claiborne. And I have been a Claiborne supporter for the past 2 years, and I am the first one to say a running back on a bad team is still an asset and a good player. With Jake Dickert coming in to coach Wake Forest, I question what that running back position is going to look like. I know, PPR formats, you're going to pick up some points. I know Wayshawn Parker was able to have success in that system last year. But 212, I mean, I know it's a depleted returning production class, but that just seems kind of rich for me, just right off the bat. But I'm willing to eat crow on Claiborne because I do like him as a player.
I'll push back. I love Claiborne. I got him as my RB4 this year. Top 20 running back from last year. Again, not a lot of proven production out there. Yes, his coaching staff changes here, but you're talking about like Dickert's system. There's no Dickert system. That was Ben Arbuckle's system. Ben Arbuckle's off to Oklahoma. They bring in the offensive coordinator out of South Alabama, who we have seen, he's been in that system for a while. We've seen that group have a top-end running back. I highly doubt Jake Dickert comes into the situation here at Wake Forest and says, hey, we got this stud running back here. Let's just not use him. And if they weren't going to use him, I feel like Claiborne would have hit the portal after the year, right? He had every opportunity to, but he stuck around regardless. Maybe that changes after spring, and that throws everything into a wrench here, but I'm pretty confident in Claiborne. I actually think he's a great value there at 212. I almost made him as my favorite pick this round, but I went with Dylan Edwards at 2-2 as my favorite pick. Again, I'm getting more okay with risk this year, and I know I just poo-pooed, Mekhi Hughes going to Oregon and everything, and it's a change of situation there. Dylan Edwards, man, we didn't see him start last year, but I feel like he's about as cut and dry of a DJ Giddens replacement as you're going to be able to get, right? Yeah, I know they added, what's his name from Nebraska. That's not going to be a problem here, right? Edwards is an incredible talent. We've seen it since game one at Colorado. He transferred out, went to Kansas State. He's best friends with Avery Johnson, right? I think this is a RB situation change that I'm personally okay with investing in early. Edwards is a true dude all back. Again, he's light. He's like less than 170 pounds, which is kind of crazy, but he's not like injury prone like a 170 pound back you would think normally would be, right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously been great to see. He's a great receiving threat, and in the bowl game he was on fire. 18 carries, 196 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, add in 7 targets, 27 yards, and a touchdown on top of that. Dude was on fire. And now, am I expecting that every game? Absolutely not. But it's pretty clear this staff knows what they have in this guy. They want him to be a feature weapon of the offense, a receiving threat on a team that doesn't have a lot of good receiving options. I think Edwards is a guy that I see creeping into the end of the first round. And I'm pretty okay with that.
I'd agree with that. Gabe Irvin was the Nebraska guy, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Dylan Edwards. I think that's a great pick. He's an archetype of a player that I tend to favor and am biased towards those, scat back, receiving, explosive, big play guys. He's more than that though, and I think he's proven that he can be more than that. So I'm very excited for him moving into this year, moving into a featured role, I would assume. Um, if we're going favorite, I'd probably say my favorite this round is Jaheim White with Rich Rod coming back to West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just a really, really good player who is going to be utilized in a system that is just going to, just funnel him the ball. He's going to get so many carries. I do question a little bit what that backfield is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
They've brought in quite a few transfers that are interesting. Yeah. So I really think, we mentioned earlier that we're assuming health for these players. I'm also willing to assume, an edge in the position battle going into things. I think Jaheim White is a great opportunity here in front of him this year, and is just going to really blossom with this Rich Rod offense.
Yeah, Chris Moxley and I kind of hashed out the West Virginia running back transfers they're bringing in. They're bringing in Ty Edwards, who, when Mox and I were discussing it, we pretty much kind of came to the conclusion he's just not a very good running back. I'm kind of surprised he's moved back up to the Power 4 here, because he wasn't even very good at the G5 level. He just had a lot of volume. LJ Turner is like the true wild card, because he's played mostly Division 2, and he freaking dominated Division 2. Like it was unfair for Catalba to have him, basically.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something there, but I agree with you. I'm going to go with the guy that's like still there, similar to Damon Claiborne, right? If they weren't going to use him, he would have transferred out. There would have been just like CJ Donaldson, right? Like he would have just been gone right there. 2 least favorite picks of mine in this round. Obviously, like you said, we can touch on DJ Lagway there. I can reiterate some of the stuff there with quarterback of like there's just better value later. But also at the same time, like DJ Lagway, I know we like the talent here, but he did average 13 fantasy points per game in conference play last year, like when he started. And that's not including the games where he only played like a limited number of snaps, like in Georgia. Like I took those out, and he still averaged only 13 fantasy points per game. Like I like Lagway the talent, but I'm not sure that system puts him in a good position for him to be a good CFF CFF quarterback in general, let alone a guy you take in the top 2 rounds. Yeah. The other one I didn't like was CJ Campbell at 2.8. Like, one, I already said it, G5 to Power 4 players, give me the ick. Let alone one coming into a backfield where there's already another guy that's looking like the main guy moving forward. Antoine Raymond's my guy. Very much fits the mold of what Rutgers already wants with their main back. He's 5'11", 202 pounds. He's shown he can handle a workload versus Minnesota and Kansas State. Meanwhile, Campbell feels like they're bringing him in more like a receiving back, change of pace kind of guy, more like a Samuel Brown replacement than a Kyle Monangai replacement.
That's fair.
So what do you think, Ethan? Thoughts on either of those two guys?
Who was the one? Lagway? Yeah, Lagway, that's a shocking stat, the fantasy points per game in conference there. I'm right there with you though. I really do like him as a talent. I think he'll probably, develop and
He'll improve.
Offseason where he's got the ability to like be the starter through the offseason program. That's I don't think that can be understated. Like I think that's a very important thing. But
I think he can get to 20 points per game easily.
yeah,
Like, I'm not
but
saying he's going to do 13 fantasy points per game again this year. Like,
yeah. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely the quarterback divide here. Like you can definitely wait on him. You definitely don't need to go that high. Demond Williams, I'm sure he's the guy who you really like that one you want to pull the trigger on. But I agree. Like, it's tough with quarterbacks this year to want to draft them early. And then on CJ Campbell, you hit it. It's really just the Raymond question. Like who ends up having that spot. Um, if we hear that CJ Campbell is, in that position to be running back one, I think that's a worthy pick and
yeah.
might still be a little bit of a reach, but just knowing that their schedule is much, much harder this year.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's a very, we've got to do a lot of projecting at this time of the year, and I think it's projecting that starting role. I could pencil in a Rutgers running back in the second round if I knew it.
Yeah, and I think one important thing to say here is that like Campbell is not built like a scat back, so like that was one of the points I was going to bring up when I first started thinking about this. Because like in my head, I just imagined Campbell as like a smaller guy, but no, he's 200 plus pounds too, so he's not like a smaller guy that only can be used in receiving game. Like I think if like Raymond went down, Campbell would be immediately slotted into that RB1 role without a doubt. Like I don't think they'd have any hesitation there.
Yeah. I will say too, was it like not 2024? I think it was 2023 when everybody thought Sam Brown was going to be the guy, and he was being drafted really early and getting a lot of buzz, and then Monangai ends up taking over and looking great.
Oh
So
yeah.
like who knows what Shiano wants to do with that running back room? He's kind of a wild card in that sense, but
True, they did go out and get Campbell, so it's not like
yeah,
they're not planning on using this guy.
absolutely. So I mean, there's an argument to be made there, but at the same time, yeah, there is more questions than answers for Campbell right now, and that's shaky in the second round.
All right, let's move on to the third round here. We'll start with a 301 pick here with Blake Horvath, quarterback out of Navy, followed up by Parker Navarro, the quarterback out of Ohio, being taken at the 302. Up next, we have Kadam Durham, the running back out of LSU, being taken at 303. Emmett Mosley, the wide receiver out of Stanford, follows him at 304. At 305, we have CJ Donaldson, the running back out of Ohio State. At 306, Eric Rivers, the wide receiver out of Georgia Tech. At 307, Shabor Pena, the wide receiver out of Syracuse. At 3.8, we have Chase Soule, the wide receiver out of Iowa State, coming over from East Carolina. At 309, L.J. Henderson, the running back out of Buffalo. At 310, Eugene Wilson, the wide receiver out of Florida. At 311, Nate Frazier, the running back out of Georgia. And then 312, James Peoples, the running back out of Ohio State. So, Ethan, what are your thoughts, man?
So we start to get some wide receivers going here, and man, do they seem off. Like I get the Emmett Mosley love. I know, and I think that was Josh who picked Emmett Mosley there. Like I get that pick, and I'm okay with him there. Eric Rivers at 306 is a statement, I feel like. Is Rutherford coming back to that
Rutherford
team?
is back.
Yeah. I'm surprised to see Eric Rivers off the board before Malik Rutherford. I don't even know if Rutherford went at all in the way too early draft. I don't think he
He did
did. Just
not.
at the board. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I like Eric Rivers. I rostered him, for his massive game last year, and that was awesome. Um, but I don't think that he's wide receiver one for Georgia Tech. And then on top of that, I'm not sure if wide receiver one at Georgia Tech is going to be as big as it was last year.
It wasn't even that big last year. Eric Singleton finished as wide receiver 86.
I mean, there you go. Yeah. So
Like that's kind of my thing with Eric
yeah,
Rivers. Like again, like I asked the guys who drafted Eric Rivers. I was just like, what does Eric Rivers do that Eric Singleton can't? Because I personally think that Eric Singleton just in a vacuum is a better receiver than Rivers. I think Rivers just dominated G5 or dominated the CUSA there, which is not incredibly hard to do for a lot of athletes. And so their response was like, well, he'll get open. I'm like, okay, I can kind of buy that. But like, if you look at like what Georgia Tech's done with
he'll get
Singleton
70 targets.
Last two
Yeah.
years, he's been capped at like 754 yards. Like, I don't think Rivers is really good enough to overcome that capping of what this passing game for Georgia Tech's going to look like. Haynes King comes back, like Jamal Haynes, like so much of the offense comes back, which usually is kind of good. And then, like you mentioned, I don't even know if he's really wide receiver one. Like Malik Rutherford's still hanging around there. Like
Yeah.
I think that's a big risk there. What
Rutherford had seemed like he became the wide receiver one throughout even last year against Singleton. Singleton's production definitely slipped and Rutherford's was higher than we thought it would be. So yeah, that's interesting. I think the elephant in this round is probably CJ Donaldson. Just because I mean
I say
he's
both. I say
a
both
divisive.
of. I say both of the Ohio State running backs kind of stick out here.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know what to think of James Peoples. Like we haven't really seen much of him. I believe that was Matt Bruning who took him. So Bruning's pretty in. Well, first of all, Bruning's in touch with Ohio State. He's got a good sources within the program there. So I tend to default to him on any Ohio State news. But um, he's also really plugged in with recruiting and it seemed like he enjoyed Peoples high school
Oh,
film and all that.
I love Peoples' talent for the most part, but like here's my big issue with both Ohio State running backs going this early. I don't mind people taking their shots on backfields, but if you're going to take a shot on a backfield, take a shot on a backfield that's shown to be productive the last couple of years, right? Like Quinshon Judkins last year, RB 69 in total points, RB 89 in fantasy points per game. Trayvon Henderson, RB 50 or RB 95 in total points, RB 118 in fantasy points per game. Like if we're expecting another split here, like that's a big problem. And I do think we should expect a split between Peoples and Donaldson. I don't think they brought in Donaldson for no reason. I think he's RB2 at worst in that backfield. And I think the duo of Peoples and Henderson, or not Henderson, Donaldson, the duo of Peoples and Donaldson is significantly a step back from the duo of Judkins and Henderson,
Yeah.
right? So if those two struggled to crack the top 60 of running backs last year, I'm scared that both of these guys could end up even worse than last year. Really,
Yeah.
you're kind of betting on one of them truly taking over as the RB1, in which case I'd rather go James Peoples at that
Yeah.
point, but that's not a third round pick in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I will push back a little bit with the fact that you don't have Will Howard running the ball anymore. Julian Sayin is, he's a play extender with his legs, but doesn't seem like he's like a de facto rusher to me.
Hmm.
Uh, I haven't seen a whole lot of him. That's really just from like going through his 247 profile and like taking a look there. Um, And then on top of that, Ohio State had offensive line issues through a good chunk of the season last year, which does make me wonder how much they wanted to run the ball. Um, but I mean, I will accept the fact like you're not going to get a more talented backfield than Quinshon and Travion, and if they're not successful, like you should have your brows raised about who can succeed in that spot if they're not succeeding. So I get the hesitation there, but I definitely I think Peoples is a more solid chance of being like a lockdown do it all back than Donaldson for sure.
I would agree. I'd rather have people. If you're going to point a gun to my head and ask me to take a running back from Ohio State in the third round here, I'd much rather go Peoples. One pick I loved here in the third round though was L.J. Henderson. That's
Yeah.
a guy he's not going to stay in the third round very long. I don't think. I think with how little production there is returning at running back, people are going to lock in on him, and he's going to move up boards here. Great finish of the season for him, top 15 in the second half of the season. Right, rare case where a MAC running back's actually sticking to the MAC, going back to his team. Right, he's a capable receiver. He had 200 plus touches last year. Like running back's already a crapshoot here in the third round. Like Henderson is a phenomenal pick if you ever manage to get him here in the third round. I highly doubt he stays down here though. So great pick by I think this was Joe Arpazi who made this pick at 3-9.
Do we know what quarterback's going to look like for Buffalo this year?
I have no freaking clue, man. But that's my answer to that is doesn't matter because I don't think CJ Agbana is really that much of a game changer.
He's not, but We do know that mobile quarterbacks help running backs, and just in general, like it's one more person for the defense to account for.
For
It
sure.
looks like Jack Shields and was Mason Cumbie the old North Texas running back or quarterback rather? I don't know. I could be confusing him.
I think you're thinking of
Um,
Cash McCollum.
perhaps. Um, Anyway, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like they have anybody big there. The reason I ask is I just think Buffalo's got talent. Like I'm a big Victor Snow and Nick McMillan man.
Hmm.
The fact that they've got both of them on the outside, like if they have a quarterback who can just like be competent and play point guard in the MAC, like they have a good shot at the MAC championship if they're able to do that. But yeah, Aljay Henderson, he's a a beast. We love to see these Buffalo running backs produce. I know it's a different system than when Leipold was there, but like
Oh yeah.
Buffalo is Buffalo. If you're talented, you're going to get the ball. And Aljay Henderson has proven that he is a good MAC talent, probably a great MAC talent, and just a good talent overall. So I'm on board with that pick for sure.
What's your favorite pick of the round?
If I'm calling it with my heart, it's Parker Navarro, just because I love Parker Navarro. But positional value, that is probably still kind of questionable. Um, I would probably say I like I like the Pena pick, but I don't know what the quarterback spot's going to look like for Syracuse. I feel like picking Chase Sowell is just kind of everybody on the C2C podcast network seems to love Chase Sowell, and I'm not 100% sold on that. I like Townsend coming in. I think both of them can be productive. So I would probably lean
You and
Emmett Mosley.
freaking Xavier Townsend, man. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, man.
I
I'm
don't think
I'm
you're
a
ever gonna
Townsend
get
guy.
off that.
Yeah. I tell you, I have a type with the explosive gadget players and he's proven I think to be a little bit more than that. But I digress. That's not what we're here to talk about. I'd probably lean Mosley. I think he's a good pick. If we expect Stanford to take a step forward, I know that's a big question mark considering what we expected them to do last year. But I'm okay with a guy like Mosley once these, top and wide receivers have gone off the board. There's a guy next round that I would probably have over him, maybe even two or three, but I just am not in love with most of these picks outside of Aljay Henderson.
I agree. I think third round is where things kind of like I think the where the lack of proven production very quickly reared its head for people, and they like there wasn't really a lot of consensus of like, all right, who should come off the board now.
For sure, for sure.
So, and I don't think we will have that really ever at any point this season. I think again the first two rounds will be pretty clear about what the order is, and then ADP is going to vary wildly after that. Let's go to round four here.
Yeah.
And we'll start with Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver out of USC, being taken off at 4-1. Eric McAllister, the wide receiver out of TCU, being taken off at 4-2. At 4-3, we had Jamal Haynes, the running back out of Georgia Tech. At 4-4, we had Cade Klubnik, quarterback out of Clemson. At 4-5, Cam Coleman, the wide receiver out of Auburn, coming off the board. At 4-6, we had Chris Bell, the wide receiver out of Louisville. At 4-7, we had Ahmad Hardy, the former running back out of UL Monroe, now headed to Mizzou. At 4-8, we had John Mateer, the quarterback out of Oklahoma, formerly of Wazoo. At 4-9, we had Quentin Joyner, the running back out of Texas Tech, formerly of USC. At 4-10, we had Carnell Tate, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. At 4-11, we had another wide receiver, Pafele Ashlock, out of Hawaii. And then last but not least, we had Wayshawn Parker, the running back out of Utah, formerly of Wazoo. A lot of transfers in this round. I realized I said formerly of a lot in that rundown there. So that's my takeaway here. It's a lot of transfers kind of coming in here. Ethan, your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I think, we're getting wide receiver heavy these rounds. That's probably a little bit more due to the constraints of this draft rather than necessarily people wanting to go wide receiver, I'd say. Um, I think that we might get a few more running backs going on teams that already have two running backs if we eliminate the fact that we're only drafting 9 rounds and trying to get a full roster. Um, that said, two guys at the wide receiver position that I would love in this round. Cam Coleman out of Auburn, I feel like should have gone early round three. I think he is a great option. And I think, Jackson Arnold going to Auburn is going to be a good thing for him. Um, if he was able to put up with Peyton Thorne and put up good numbers, like I think there's a good opportunity now. Um, Jackson Arnold doesn't have to be who we thought he was going to be. He just has to be, a capable quarterback who can move the chains. His receiving core there is definitely shaping up and looking really great. So I love that. I also think Pofeli Ashlock is a great pick. Um, I don't know if I'm as high on them as I was going into last year. Something's going on in Hawaii, and I don't know if it's just a lack of institutional buy-in with that program, or if it's, Timmy Chang's system just isn't going to be what we thought it was going to be. But this is the year. This is make or break for Timmy Chang and that offense. Pofeli Ashlock is the best weapon that they have on that team. And I think that he's going to be a great uh, target for Alejado moving into this year. I think there's just going to be an excitement to stay up for those 1 a.m. games and watch the Rainbow Warriors this year.
So I will ask you this because Nate Marquise brought this up on the latest Defending the Natty episode, and which, by the way, y'all should go check out. Latest Defending the Natty episode with myself and Nate Marquise. We discuss our top 5 at each position for CFF Dynasty going into 2025. We had a grand old time. Let me give you the receiving numbers per game for Pofeli Ashlock the second half of the year. 42 yards, 21 yards, 30 yards, 17 yards, 12 yards, 79 yards.
Yeah,
That
it's scary.
it got pretty rough there in the second half.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he had a nice game there against New Mexico. 8 catches, 79 yards, a touchdown. Once Michael Alejado was under center, so fingers crossed we get to see a lot more of that this year. But I do think it is somewhat worrying. But at the same time, when you are dealing with a scenario here with very little proven production coming back at wide receiver, I'm going to go with a guy that was on pace for over 9-10 targets a game each of the last 2 years. Like, if that system does kick off there at Hawaii, like, Ashlock's going to be one of the main beneficiaries, and I'm willing to take that shot there in the 4th round. My favorite pick of this round, you mentioned Cam Coleman and Pofeli Ashlock. I adore the Eric McAllister pick there at 4-2. I have McAllister as my wide receiver 6 in my rankings headed into the year, and he came off as wide receiver 13 here. TCU has 243 vacated targets last year between Beck, Savion Williams, and JP Richardson. Right? TCU is not changing. They're going to continue to throw the ball 40 times a game. They need somebody on the other end to catch the ball. McAllister comes back from last year, where he led TCU in yards per reception at 19.5. He led in yards per route run at 2.89, which is getting up into elite territory. Like, with those metrics, that tells me that TCU's got a ton of vacant opportunity. Their most efficient weapon is also their leading returning weapon, right? Ton of opportunity here. I think McAllister's in for a monster year. I think with him being the clear number 1 target for TCU, that he could, this could end up being a monster pick here in the 4th round. I like Jordan Dwyer. I think he makes a nice secondary option. I think he'll be fantasy relevant at times this year. But TCU is one of those offenses where they throw the ball enough to where I think 2 guys could be relevant here. McAllister could be a monster though.
He could be. I think there's more risk than you're willing to give with the fact that they bring in Jordan Dwyer, they bring in Manjack from Houston.
I'm not worried about Manjack.
I'm just putting it out there that I think Manjack has a very Sonny Dykes style of football, and that he will be an emphasis for the offense, at least from a game plan standpoint, not necessarily from a fantasy standpoint. I bring in those names because I question how much, yes, there's a huge open vacant target share coming into this year, but I think that there's more than one guy. Like, Sonny Dykes doesn't like going to a one de facto receiver. Like, even when Quentin Johnston was there, like, I feel like Johnston regressed a little bit in that first year that Dykes was there. I don't know. There's something about it that just feels kind of icky to me. I don't love the McAllister pick personally. So I will let you have him probably
I will take him in the third or
10
fourth
times out of
round
10.
all day
Yeah.
long. I love the opportunity there. Again, 243 targets, man. Like that's like yeah, I understand we're bringing in multiple people here, but like how do you divide up those 243 targets there, right? You send maybe 40 to the tight end, whoever ends up being,
Yeah.
right? That still leaves you 200 targets. McAllister already had like 58 last year, right? So like I'm not saying he's going to get 130 targets here or anything like that, but I think McAllister can get another 40 out of that 200 that are left.
Yeah, I mean probably,
But
but
that puts him at the magic number, right about 100.
TCU is an offense that I really like from a fun standpoint, but like it never seems to concentrate the way that we want it to or expect it to. There's always something funky. They spread the ball around a little too much. Josh Hoover is a more established quarterback who I know like good quarterback play helps receivers, but like if your quarterback is too good, he's able to distribute the ball to just about anybody instead of just focusing in on a like you're not going to get the funnel of targets that you usually get. So I see reason for optimism, but I am very much going to be pumping the brakes on the McAllister hype train.
Alrighty. I'll be driving it. I'll be driving it while Ethan's on my caboose just trying to like throw rocks underneath it.
It's totally fair. I'll Spider-Man that moving bus and try and do what I can.
There you go. All right, let's move on to round 5 here. And in round 5, we had Jalen Buckley, the running back out of Western Virginia, come off at the 501. At 5'2", Micah Alejado, the quarterback out of Hawaii, comes off the board. At 5'3", Telly Johnson, the running back out of NIU. At 5'4", Colton Joseph, the quarterback out of Old Dominion, comes off the board. At 5'5", Kevin Concepcion, the former wide receiver out of NC State, now at Texas A&M. At 5'6", we have Devontae Ross, the wide receiver out of Troy, formerly top 10 wide receiver from last year. He is now at Penn State. At 5'7", we have Ryan Wingo, the wide receiver out of Texas. At 5'8", Joseph Williams, the former wide receiver out of Tulsa, now at Colorado. At 5'9", Devin McEwen, the wide receiver out of UTSA. At 5'10", Malik Sherrod, the former running back out of Fresno State, now over there at Boise State. At 5'11", Barian Brown, the wide receiver out of LSU, formerly of Kentucky. And last but not least, we have Jaden Baugh, the running back out of Florida, at the 5'12" spot. So, Ethan, your thoughts, man?
Yeah, things are scary at the wide receiver position around here. Not a fan of the Concepcion transfer. I don't think that A&M is a good spot for him. I'm sure he got a real nice bag to go to Texas A&M, but I'm not sure that is the place. Well, I'm pretty sure it's not the place for him to develop his skills as a receiver. So I question how productive he's going to be. I don't know if we've seen a really capable receiver in this Colin Klein offense.
So I got the numbers right here for you,
Numbers
Ethan.
for me?
I got numbers for you. So slot receivers, which is where Kevin Concepcion will be playing under Colin Klein. 2024, 52 targets, 38 receptions, 381 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, granted, that passing offense was rough last year. Let's go back another year. 2023, 81 targets, 53 receptions, 589 yards, 5 touchdowns. Then you go back another year, 73 targets, 46 receptions, 593 yards, 4 touchdowns. Now, maybe this is Mike Elko. We can go see what Mike Elko's done. I already gave you last year, but 2023, 80 targets, 50 receptions, 666 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2022, 90 targets, 62 receptions, 863 yards. All right, sounds pretty good so far. 4 touchdowns. You're 100% right. Like, the slot receiver has not proven to be a go-to place for either one of these coaching trees.
And like it's probably not the kiss of death, like a ceiling of,
Yeah.
80, 85 targets. Like he can still be a producer. But he's not a wide receiver one for fantasy purposes and is I argue probably not a wide receiver for fantasy. I am off him at this price. Devontae Ross, as much as I would like to be a homer and tell you that Penn State's going to throw to wide receivers this year, I cannot do that in good faith. And so I think it's very much a wishful pick at 506. I think it's probably sketchier than Concepcion because Concepcion has at least showed that he can play in Power Four and have some production.
Penn State's very much in the same mold as Georgia right now, where it's just been whiff after whiff in the wide receiver recruiting department.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to give both programs credit for the fact that like, hey, if you can't develop talent, you go and get a guy who
Oh, for
who
sure.
like we're just under recruited. And so I think Devontae Ross is probably going to be better than any receiver we had last year. Um, that being said, like I still think that the guys that we had last year should have been utilized better. And so I don't think that it's entirely a talent problem. I think there's a little bit of Drew Aller at play. I think there's a little bit of just sketchy usage. And I think there's a lot of, hey, just play to your strengths. You have a guy like Tyler Warren, go and use Tyler Warren. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see. I think in the tight end discussion, there's definitely reason for Penn State to be involved in these topics, but I don't think Penn State has any discussion in a 9-round way too early mock draft outside of Nicholas Singleton and maybe maybe why am I blanking on his name?
Katron Allen.
Tron Allen, thank you. So I don't think that they have any place here. Um, the other wide receivers or the other running backs I'm intrigued by here. Jaden Baugh is an interesting name. I assume Montrell Johnson is gone. I
Yes.
haven't confirmed that. Malik Sherrod, I think there's been plenty of discourse around Boise State running backs. It's likely a carousel of different ones that we're going to be getting at times. So I don't think he has the ability to steal that room away and be a running back one. But we've seen that two running back systems can be productive there. So I can yield that a little bit. And then I really like both of the quarterbacks this round, Colton Joseph and Micah Alejado. If we're talking, potential to be QB1, I think both of them have upside that is in that territory. So I have no problem with either of those picks. Again, Hawaii, you're just hoping that Alejado is able to really light the fire in that offense that has had issues the past 2-3 years.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Colton. Like, this is where I think the quarterback value, like, if you can get some of these guys to fall in the 5th round here, I don't know if you'll get that every single draft, but like Colton Joseph in the 5th round is a great value to me, right? Top 8 quarterback in the second half of last season, stays in the Sun Belt, year 2 in the system. I have as my QB3 in rankings. You're able to get him here at QB10 in this draft, considering that QB3 went off in the 2nd round. You can get my actual QB here 3 rounds later.
Yeah.
I have to give props here. I think Colton Joseph is a great pick there. This round also to me solidifies just this is not the range I'm going to be taking a lot of wide receivers. I don't think, because looking at guys like Joseph Williams, Ryan Wingo, Barry Brown, like Devontae Ross, Kevin Concepcion, there's just so many questions here, and like I really don't think like some of these guys I'm looking at like Barry Brown, like Devontae Ross, Kevin Concepcion, these are guys I probably wouldn't even consider until like round 10. So if like that same range of guys are going to go here versus round 10 and everything, I'll take all those guys that are going around 10 probably more than anything else.
Yeah. And there are a handful of running backs that come after this in the next 3 or 4 rounds that are all I would have over guys like Concepcion, Ross, even probably over Joseph Williams at this point, or Barry and Brown. So definitely some good options left on the board.
I also think Barry Brown's kind of I don't want to say a rough pick because I don't want to like hate on anybody's picks or anything like that. But considering he's the first LSU wide receiver off the board here, guys like Aaron Anderson, Chris Hilton, Nick Anderson, they all come off later here. I just think that in and of itself, if you're taking the first LSU wide receiver off the board, I think you're putting yourself in a bad position, especially in the 5th round.
It's a no-win spot. Yeah, it's a no-win spot taking the first receiver in that room.
So, all right, let's go to round 6 here. We'll start off with Nick Marsh, the wide receiver out of Michigan State, going off at 6'1". At 6'2", Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback out of LSU. 6'3", Devin Dampier, the quarterback out of Utah, formerly of New Mexico, formerly top 2 quarterback on the year last year, transferring up. At 6'4", we have Kevin Coleman, the wide receiver out of Mizzou. At 6'5", we have Avery Johnson, the quarterback out of Kansas State. At 6'6", we have Damian Taylor, the running back out of Troy. At 6'7", Haynes King, quarterback out of Georgia Tech. At 6'8", Caden Robinson, the wide receiver out of UCLA. At 6'9", Dejon Stripling, the former wide receiver out of Oklahoma State, now at Ole Miss. At 6'10", Easton Messer, the former wide receiver out of Western Kentucky, now at Florida Atlantic. At 6'11", Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver out of Indiana. And to finish up the round, at 6'12", is Mr. Zevi Eckhouse, the quarterback out of Wazoo. So, Ethan, your thoughts, man?
There are three guys who I really like in this range. Nussmeier, Messer, and Eckhouse are all guys that I think are going to be rising from this spot. Nussmeier just has the tools. I know he really struggled down the stretch, but like he's a guy who I have complete faith in. They surround him with some great weapons at LSU. I really think he's going to take the next step, and he's got the ability to be a Heisman winning quarterback. Easton Messer, going from FAU or going from Western Kentucky to FAU. I believe Bainbridge also he got Veltkamp as the stack for that in the following round. So really like Messer. I would rather have Messer than every wide receiver picked in the round of the wide receivers that went earlier in round 6 as well. So I think Messer is probably a guy who we'll see rise into the 5th, possibly even the 4th round as things keep going. Zevi Eckhouse, I'm kind of surprised he lasted this long because I know that there's big turnover in Washington State, and I know, he's not John Mateer, but like the way that he played in that bowl game, like he's got juice too. There's a reason why Mateer and Eckhouse didn't see a lot of separation going into the season last year. So I'm on the Zevi Eckhouse train. I think he's going to be a great option. Also, honorable mention to the Elijah Surratt and Damian Taylor pick. I think both of them are good picks. Surratt is in an interesting spot because I really do think he's going to get volume. And I think obviously we're going to see them throw the ball a lot. How good is Indiana with Fernando Mendoza is the real question. But I think he's got some real sleeper potential to be a really great option this year. Again, in a landscape without much proven production, he's a proven guy who just has some questionable variables around him.
Yeah, I like the Elijah Surratt pick a lot there at 6'11". I mean, you pretty much touched on a lot of my favorite picks in this round. But the Elijah Surratt one really sticks out to me because, like, you look at all the other wide receivers in this round, the round before and everything, there's a lot of big risks that are be taken in this range versus Surratt. It does kind of feel like a guy that is relatively known. Yeah, he didn't finish great last year. I think he finished like wide receiver 41 in total points here, but there was a couple of things there that kind of hurt him. But there's a lot of things here that kind of point to him having a bigger year in 2024 or 2025, right? One, he's a senior. They're going to want to feed him. He's been with Kirk Cignetti for 3 years now. They're going to want to like help him out there. Keyshawn Williams, Miles Price, Miles Cross. What do all three of those guys have in common, Ethan?
They're not as talented as Elijah Surratt.
That's true, but guess what? They're also gone. And that vacates about 128 targets from last year. Now, again, obviously, is Surratt going to get all of those? No. But Surratt's had 90 targets in 2023, 84 targets this past year. I think that Surratt is going to be able to kind of get up towards that 100 targets on the season range, especially if Mendoza, one, as you kind of mentioned, is not as good as Rourke, right? Maybe he locks into Surratt just a little bit more. Two, like if Surratt can just hold on to some of these balls just a little bit more, he doesn't need that much more to have a great CFF season, right? Again, last year, 957 yards, 8 touchdowns in regular season, 18.1 yards per reception. He actually improved on his efficiency from when he was at James Madison, which is actually kind of crazy. Like his ADOT went from 10.7 to 13.7 last year. Like they are using him as a deep weapon for this offense. And I think that he's going to continue to be used in that way. He's getting those high efficient targets there. He only needs about 15 more targets to kind of get him up to that magic number of 100 targets on the season. I absolutely think he can get 15 out of 128 vacated targets. I am a big fan of Surratt being picked in this range, and I kind of hope he stays in this range because I'll probably grab him a whole ton. My least favorite pick, though, I think has to be Nick Marsh at 6'1". Again, there's a lot of risk with some of these wide receivers, but I kind of get, Kevin Coleman, replacing Luther Burden. Caden Robinson, he's back with Joey Aguilar. Like, he was pretty good 2 years ago with Joey Aguilar. Maybe that UCLA offense gets going this year. Dejon Stribling at Ole Miss. Ole Miss wide receivers, we love them. Easton Messer and Elijah Surratt. We just talked about those two guys, but Nick Marsh, man, I get that people like the talent here. There's some things you like here, right? He led Michigan State in yards per route run last year. He had 15.8 yards per reception. That's a lot of good efficiency numbers there. Monterey Foster's gone. That opens up 81 targets. But Marsh got only 62 targets last year. That's about 5.6 targets per game. It'd be a huge jump for him to kind of get into where you want him to be for CFF range. Michigan State also brings in Amari Kelly and Christian McCray as competitors for those targets. Now, I think that Marsh is still probably more talented than both those guys? Yeah, I would agree. But then you look at Jonathan Smith's wide receiver one the last few years. 2024, Foster had 81 targets. Bolden, 80 targets. Trayshawn Harrison, 78 targets. Like, scarily consistent top numbers for the top receiver for Jonathan Smith's system. So I just don't really see Marsh getting past that. And because of that, I don't really see a reason to take him as early as the 6th round here.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect breakdown. 6'1" is definitely, rich for a Michigan State player in general. And then assuming that it's going to be, Nick Marsh, I get the desire to go, and like you always see this ceiling of a great receiver or a good receiver on a poor offense as, hey, they're going to be trailing, they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, he's going to be the number one guy. All of the reasons you mentioned, though, like that's great way to kind of keep that thinking in check, because I think Christian McCray and Amari Kelly are going to be, reasonably useful weapons for them. And Childs wants to prove that he can distribute the ball and do that. So I don't think he's going to be locked into Marsh. So I agree. That's probably the more questionable pick of the round.
All right, let's move on to round 7. At 7-1, we have Aaron Anderson, the wide receiver out of LSU. At 7-2, Bryson Donaldson, the running back out of Fresno State. At 7-3, Caden Veltkamp, the quarterback formerly of Western Kentucky, now at Florida Atlantic. At 7-4, TJ Moore, the wide receiver out of Clemson. At 7-5, Max Clare, the tight end out of Ohio State. At 7-6, Brennan Sorsby, the quarterback out of Cincinnati. At 7-7, Kevin Jennings, the quarterback out of SMU. 7-8, Sawyer Robertson, the quarterback out of Baylor. At 7-9, Arliss Boardingham, the former tight end out of Florida, headed over to Bowling Green. At 7-10, Colin Lacey, the wide receiver out of Louisville. And at 7-11, Chip Trayanum, the running back formerly of Kentucky, Ohio State, and Arizona State. Now at his 4th stop down to Toledo. And then at 7-12, Trayvon Rudolph, the wide receiver formerly of NIU, headed over to Toledo, sticking in the MAC there. So Ethan, favorite pick, worst pick, general thoughts in this round, what you got?
For the most part, I really like this round. Like we're starting to get into like which guy is your guy. And I like that territory in drafts. I can't really like dog on any of these picks, particularly with the tight end variable in play of needing to have a tight end through the first 9 rounds. That being said, both tight ends have more questions than I would want to have them be my first tight end off the board. Claire and Boardingham, obviously both are transferring. Max Clare, Chris K and I talked about it a little bit on this past week's Ballin' with My Bestie, and we have some concerns over what that ceiling is for Max Clare in this offense. Great talent. Obviously, some vacated targets with Egbuka gone. This offense is going to look a lot different without Will Howard. So I'm not saying that he's going to be not a part of that offense, but he's not going to have the same target share that he had on Purdue. And he is going to have to rely on just having upped efficiency, and hoping that he gets more touchdown production. I wouldn't count on touchdown production just in general.
No,
especially for a tight end. Like I think
like,
that's overstated for tight ends.
not especially not when you're competing for Jeremiah Smith in the red zone.
Totally. Yeah. And so like I do like Max Clare as a player. I think he's a good pick. I just don't have him as my tight end one. I probably have him close at a tight end 5 or 6 this year. So having him the first tight end off the board was a little bit surprising to me. Arliss Boardingham is another one that like I get the rationale behind it. He's probably going to be my tight end, probably in that same area, like 4 or 5, 6, somewhere around there. I don't think he's a slam dunk, despite being, a talented kid transferring down to the MAC. We know what he's trying to do, and we know like the fact that he's hoping for the volume bump and being able to see that. And for any MAC school to get an SEC player, that's what they're feeding them too. They're feeding them the narrative that you are going to be the guy. Um, so I get that, and I'm a sucker for narrative street. So don't think that's me hating on narratives. But I think Arliss Boardingham is much closer to that 440, 400 threshold that we like to see that Froton calls out with tight ends who are fantasy relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Outside of the tight end spot, I think all of these quarterbacks are really appealing.
Oh
I
yeah.
think all of them are great upside swings. I would feel confident with any of them in my room. I think the TJ Moore pick is probably, let me see. I think I'd rather have TJ Moore than Aaron Anderson. I was going to say that the TJ Moore pick was one of my least favorite one there, but it seems like he's just wide receiver 3 in this very talented wide receiver room for Clemson. I think Wesco and Antonio Williams, though, have really solidified their spots in this offense. Um, I believe Brenningstool is he
He is done.
production for a guy like TJ Moore to increase his production, because I don't think Antonio Williams or Wesco are necessarily going to see more targets this year. So I think that a majority of vacated targets to a guy like Brenningstool are probably going to go to TJ Moore.
No,
Um,
I would certainly agree. Again, like yeah, I am surprised in this draft though that again TJ Moore comes off the board before Bryant Wesco. Brian Wesco doesn't come off the board at all in these first 9 rounds, and
that was my shock.
that's
Yeah.
like that I've seen that over and over again in the best ball so far. That like TJ Moore comes off as the second wide receiver for Clemson, and Wesco's kind of fallen a little bit, and I'm like, I'll scoop up Wesco and like
Glad.
rounds afterwards and everything. Like what's the theory that Kay came up with, right? Where it's like the big like the jumbo wide receiver 3. Like I think it was him or Froton came up. Like if Wesco's gonna be that jumbo wide receiver 3, like sure, I'll take that all day long. I actually like him better than TJ Moore. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's probably influencing why I think this TJ Moore pick is a reach. Like I think TJ Moore is a great player, but I would expect Wesco to be ahead of him. Just
it
in a vacuum.
it's funny that you were saying that like you can't really dog on any of these picks. Like I'm kind of feeling the opposite. Like I can't really praise any of these picks. Like I don't really think I love any of the picks that came in this round. The one I kind of thought I loved in Bryson Donaldson at Fresno State, like given how like there isn't much to love at running back, especially once you get in the 7th round here. I'm like, oh, that's actually a really good pick. Until I looked at the new Fresno State's head coach's history of running backs at North Dakota State, and boy, hello, Captain Committee. That sucked all the life out of the room I had for Bryson Donaldson right now. Like, I need to hear some really good spring reports of like Donaldson like taking over that room and stuff like that for me to kind of get back on that train. My personal least favorite pick of this round, though, is Trayvon Rudolph at 7-12 there. I understand going after the system that just made Juan Newton the wide receiver 16 in total points last year. He's gone. There's a lot of vacated targets there. I think about 101 vacated targets. So I understand. Junior Vanderos is back. He'll probably do much of the same as he did last year. My problem is that Rudolph, outside of his like second year there in 2021, like it's not been a pretty production profile for him. Like we just keep on waiting for him to kind of make that next major step, and it's just not been there. Again, 2021, 824 yards, 7 touchdowns. You're like, all right, here we go. 3.5 yards per route run. This is awesome. Then he tears his ACL. And when he's come back the last 2 years, 509 yards, 2 touchdowns, just under 2 yards per route run. This past year, everything dropped even further. 37 receptions, 392 yards, a touchdown, 1.78 yards per route run. Like, he's not trending in the right direction, which is a very big problem when he's doing that in the MAC. Now, maybe some fresh air is what he needs, a fresh place and stuff like that. That could do wonders for him potentially. But I'm kind of looking at it and saying like, I know we just kind of want to plug and play him into the Juan Newton role, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be a slam dunk thing to happen.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't hate the pick. I get it. I think that, Trayvon Rudolph has the ability to be what he was prior to his injury. Um, I think that just Northern Illinois' identity just got in the way of that, to be honest. Like, it seemed like they never really had the chess pieces to go out and sling the ball around. And they always had decent offensive line play and good running backs. So I get it, and I think that's what Rudolph is. I'm sure that's played into his thought process and leaving NIU to go to a different MAC school. So at this point in the draft, like, I'm okay with it. It's a reach, but I'm okay with it.
Everything's going to feel like a
really
reach
like
at
the
this
chip
point.
on him.
I said everything's going to feel like a reach at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I do like the Chip Trayanum pick there. I think that, if we're thinking Toledo, thinking, a P4 transfer down, similar to was it Bryant Koback who did the same thing, transferred
Mm-hmm.
from the SEC to Toledo. Um, I think Trayanum is very appealing here in the seventh round, especially late in the seventh round, when running backs are definitely drying up a little bit.
All right, let's move on to round 8 here. In round 8 at 8:01, we have Byron Brown, quarterback out of South Florida. And then here's where all the tight ends come in, thanks to the
Yep.
restrictions of this draft for sure. 8:02, Jack Endries, the tight end out of Cal. 8:03, Joe Royer, the tight end out of Cincinnati. At 8:04, Eli Sanders, the running back out of formerly of New Mexico, now at Southern Cal. At 8:05, Justin Jolie, the tight end out of North Dakota State. At 8:06, Tucker Gleason, the quarterback out of Toledo. At 8:07, Tanner Koziel, the tight end out of Wisconsin. At 8:08, Fluff Bothwell, the former running back out of South Alabama, now at Mississippi State. At 8:09, Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon. At 8:10, Chris Hilton, the wide receiver out of LSU. 8:11, we got Eli Sauers, the tight end out of Vanderbilt. And finishing up the round is wide receiver Matthew Coleman out of San Jose State at the 8:12 there. So, Ethan, general thoughts, man. What are you thinking here?
So let's look at tight ends in this situation because we get a bunch of them. The two guys that I really like, well, I'll throw three in there. I think Joe Royer, Kenyon Sadiq, and Eli Stowers are probably my top three tight ends going into this year. I think Sadiq's athletic profile is absurd. We saw Oregon look for him down the stretch multiple times. I'm thinking primarily Big Ten championship game. He had a great showing against Penn State. He's just a mismatch and is a great athlete. I see no reason to think that, he's not going to blow up. Just knowing like the weapons Oregon has this year and the fact that they don't have like a standout wide receiver one. Like, I know they've got the A&M transfer.
Evan Stewart.
Yeah, Evan Stewart. I kept thinking Noah Thomas, and I'm like, he does not Noah Thomas. Yeah, Evan Stewart. I know he's, projected to be that wide receiver one. We've seen him kind of flail around a little bit the past 2 years, and not really look like an alpha for a team. So to me, Sadiq is the sole tight end that has the ability to put up a Harold Fannin, Tyler Warren season. He hasn't shown that yet that he can do that, but I think there's no reason not to be able to like put that in your reasonable outcome of projection or your projection for reasonable outcomes. Joe Royer is a great Mr. Consistent, it seems like. If we want to go, like comps, like Jason Witten, kind of like productive. Young Witten was athletic and productive and was able to be a good possession receiver and was a weapon. In college, I think Joe Royer is a similar guy who is able to be a weapon for a Cincinnati offense that isn't going to sling the ball around necessarily. But Royer moves the chains. He finds the end zone. Like he is a good target machine for Cincinnati. And then Eli Stowers gets Diego Pavia back. The Pavia Stowers connection is going to be a fun one again. We saw him just absolutely get force fed last year. Um, why not do it again? Like, what's changing in that system? I don't think anything changes. They were hella successful last year. Like, they will do it again. And so those three guys really jump off the board to me. Outside of the tight end position, getting that third LSU receiver, Chris Hilton, is probably the value because he's the third wide receiver, and you can kind of just plug and play any of those receivers into any of those draft slots. So the last one coming off the board is a value. And then Fluff Bothwell at Mississippi State is really interesting. I don't know what your thoughts are if you think he's going to be, a good option for them, but he definitely seems like he'll have that backfield well in hand.
So, all right, I'll start with Fluff Bothwell because that's where you kind of ended here. It's actually my least favorite pick of the round.
Really? Okay.
I like Fluff. Don't get me wrong. Jump from the Sun Belt to the SEC is a big one, though. He's also going to a team that's likely going to play from behind a lot. He can catch. Don't get me wrong, but he only had 5.7 yards per catch last year, so he's not exactly like a huge weapon in the receiving game. Here's the big one. Davin Booth is still around. He's got another year. And Davin Booth last year ran 5 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Again, he's not like a game breaker or anything like that. I just don't know how Fluff really comes in and unseats him in year one as RB1, let alone on top of that, breaking away so far from Davin Booth that he becomes like a fantasy asset. I think that Fluff Bothwell, like if you take your shot on him, that's fine. I get it. I like the talent. I just think it's something you got to wait until like the back half of your draft for, let alone, top 10 rounds here. Your analysis on the tight ends is spot on. To me, in a year like this where, hardly, actually, let me see. I think no top 12 tight ends come back from last year. I think that is what no top 12 tight ends come back from last year. 4 of them transferred to new locations. You kind of like where all of them landed, right? Like Tanner Koziel going to Wisconsin, that seems fun. Claire at Ohio State, you already talked about him. Terrence Carter going to Texas Tech, that could be fun. Torian Fleming going to Maryland, all that could be fun. But it's this next tier right here, right? Eli Stowers, Justin Joly, Joe Royer, Blake Bosma, Jack Endries I'd throw in this category as well, and potentially Kenyon Sadiq as well. What you have to look for, in my opinion, is look for guys that have a very good shot at leading their receiving room in receptions and potentially production, right? I think that's the only really way you can go. Like I personally, in this next round, the last round, I drafted Matthew Lauder, who comes back with a good production profile from last year. Don't get me wrong. Like he was tight end 16 on the year. But after I made that pick, I kind of realized, like, and I said this in the draft special as well, I'm like, I think I'd rather almost pay up just a little bit for a guy like Eli Stowers or Justin Joly or Joe Royer, where it seems like that's who's going to lead the room in receptions next year. Because, like, who else are they really going to throw to? Versus Matthew Lauder could easily be, option 2 or 3 on his own team. And so I think that's where the value of guys like that. Eli Stowers is my favorite pick of this round. Again, like, he's my top tight end coming into this year. He's the highest scoring tight end, returning to his same school from last year. As you mentioned, nothing really changed from last year. You get him tight end 8 in this draft. Like, great pick there by, I believe that's Eric Froton who made that pick there. No, this is 8-12, so that's G55. Yeah. So again, good on them. Like that was a much better pick than my own Tucker Gleason, who I took at 8-6, and I probably could have grabbed a quarterback at the same value in the next round compared to a guy like Eli Stowers. What do you think about this Matthew Coleman pick at 8-12? Because again, monster game to finish up in the bowl game. He's already, I've seen in the best ball, starting to kind of come up a little bit, which really kind of makes me a little mad because I was like really hoping that he might be somebody that kind of flies under the radar just a little bit. What are your thoughts there?
Uh, to me, he screams 2023 DT Sheffield, and he screams 2024. Um, oh gosh, who's the Washington State slot receiver we were pumping up last year?
Oh, Josh Meredith.
Yeah. So like it seems to me that that's kind of the same ilk. Um, I'm not sold on it, but I will say I would just rather have a different guy in that room a little bit later. Malachi Riley transfers in. I know he got a little bit of buzz at Arizona last year. Didn't do anything, but he only played 4 games. And it seemed to me like he shut himself down because he knew he was going to go elsewhere. He was really the only addition that that San Jose State team made outside of, I feel like they may have had like an FCS transfer as well. Um, so I don't know. I think it's too rich for what I'm willing to pay, but it's totally fair that, a guy who blows up in a game or two in a season before, he's going to get that kind of a bump, especially when we're looking at such a barren landscape.
Yeah, I'm taking a look now. Let's see positions, wide receiver. Yeah, you're definitely right about Malachi Riley, but I will say Malachi Riley mostly played on the outside in the limited snaps that he did get in at Arizona. It looks like On Three doesn't have either of them because I know you're right. Like they definitely added another person as well. But like Matthew Coleman again, he looked phenomenal to end the season here, right? Like again, 12 catches, 119 yards, and a touchdown in the bowl game. He very much got that Nick Nash treatment,
Yeah.
and that does me something good there. I liked him here in this 8th round. I think that was good, but I've started to see him kind of creep up into the 6th round now in some of these early
Yeah.
drafts, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. That's a lot of risk there.
It looks like Malachi Riley had roughly 50 snaps last year. He played 33 out wide and 13 in the slot. So
Yeah, so
he's
a little
definitely,
split.
yeah.
Which again, like if much like Nash, because Nash was outside before this new staff came in, so I feel like it's that whoever their most talented receiver is will go in the slot,
Yeah, that's fair.
and so we'll see as spring camps go along if Malachi Riley kind of steps up in that role. But as of now, I'm okay with Matthew Coleman as long as he's down here in this range, not round 6.
Yeah.
Let's go round 9 here, our last round of this draft. At 9-1, we had Bauer Sharp, the former Oklahoma tight end, headed over to LSU. At 9-2, Corey Rucker, wide receiver out of Arkansas. At 9-3, John Michael Gillenborg, the tight end out of Wyoming. At 9-4, Cedric Baxter, the running back out of Texas. At 9-5, Ethan Vasco, the quarterback formerly of Coastal Carolina, now over at Liberty. At 9-6, Ted Hurst, the wide receiver out of Georgia State. 9-7, the aforementioned Matthew Lauder, tight end out of Boise State. At 9-8, Kanye Udo, the former Army running back, headed over to Arizona State. At 9-9, Sam Levitt, quarterback out of Arizona State. At 9-10, Nick Anderson, the wide receiver out of LSU. 9-11, Carson Beck, quarterback out of Miami. And with the 12th pick, the very last pick of this draft, Landon Thomas, tight end out of Florida State. So, Ethan, general thoughts, man. What do you think of this last round here?
There's some fun names here. John Michael Gillenberg Borg is a quality pick, I think, at tight end here. Bainbridge grabbed him at 903. Um, I don't think Bauer Sharp is going to be the guy at LSU.
I agree.
So I scratched my head a little bit on that one. Um, I also don't recommend going after a tight end in gosh, it's the UCF
Gus Malzahn.
Gus Malzahn. Yeah, I don't recommend tight end in Malzahn's system in anything fantasy relevant. So I'm off Landon Thomas as well. I thought there was a decent conversation about Sam Levitt on this most recent Burning the Red Shirt podcast. I do think that he is definitely a benefactor of some strong performances down the stretch. Like if they don't have a postseason,
Mm-hmm.
are we talking about Sam Levitt at all? I mean, that hypothetical is a little silly because he did have a postseason and he did play very well. But I get it. I think that there's a little bit of projection coming in for Sam Levitt over the course of a season. And assuming that he's going to throw the ball more because Scatabo is gone. So
Yeah, Sam Levitt ended up finishing as the QB 40 in total points, and then I think, yeah, at best, second half of the season, he didn't have. Let's see, week 7 on, he was quarterback 39, so pretty much exactly the same. He had a little bit of a bump towards the end, where like week 9 on, he was quarterback 33, then quarterback 16 the week afterwards. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like a lot of it comes from the fact that again, Arizona State just looked really, really good down the stretch.
yeah, for sure. I think my favorite pick here is actually Corey Rucker at 902.
Okay.
He is a guy, I mean, he's a post-hype sleeper because we've loved him previously. Went around, did his tour of transfers, and is ended up back here at Arkansas State. 705 receiving yards last year and 36 catches. I feel like he is a strong, um, solid wide receiver in an area in the draft that you probably don't have that kind of floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does offer a decent ceiling. I would expect him to probably rise a round or two, because I do think that he's got an interesting profile. And Arkansas State, Jalen Raynor, say what you will about him as a passer, but like there's something in that offense that gives you reason to be a little optimistic about it. So like I feel like he's at least got some excitement around the program. And he's going to be wide receiver one. So like I'm in there. Uh, I don't know anything about Ted Hurst, so that's a name that legit is probably the first time I've heard his name before.
That's crazy because he was, let's
Did he
see.
go off last year? Late
Oh
last year?
yeah, yeah, he was a wide receiver. Where is he? Where are you, Ted? Ted Hurst finishes wide receiver 25 in total points
Wow.
last year and wide receiver 34 in fantasy points per game. He
Okay.
had a great stretch down the stretch. I will use vocab words here.
That's
Uh,
totally fine.
but again, like, yeah, games start of the season 3.6, 17.3, 28.3 bye week, 19.2 bye week, 17.5, 2, 13.2, 18.6, 7.4, 27.8, 6.1, 19.1.
Man.
He
Okay.
was pretty consistent down the stretch, and you're talking about a guy that hit 100 targets last year. I
Man,
That's why, in
apologies
my
to
opinion,
Mr. and Mrs. Hurst.
he
I
is
wasn't familiar with the game.
he is in my opinion probably one of the better picks of this round. I like Corey Rucker. I agree with you for a lot of the same reasons. Where you got 200 target guys coming back from last year, and you're getting them here in the 9th round. Now I don't think they'll stay here. I think as
Yeah.
people kind of realize that, but um, Hurst comes back to Georgia State. You lose Dorian Fleming. That's going to open up some targets. I think Fleming had like
Yeah.
75 targets last year. Again, not all of them obviously are going to go to Hurst, but I think that'll help him push a little bit above that 100 target threshold that he was just hitting last year. His ADOT's insane. Hurst has a ton of high value targets here. His ADOT is 17.2 yards. Like average
Mm.
depth of target, 17.2 yards. Like that is some high value targets that he is getting there. It's part of the reason why he was so productive because every time he was getting targeted, it was a ton of yards that were kind of coming with it. And so, yeah, I like
What do
Ted.
you think that quarterback room ends up looking like? I don't think Vayu is the answer there. I know they had somebody else in there last year, but they bring in PJ Hatter and Cameron Brown from Texas Tech.
I
Um,
pray to God that it's whoever wins that job, it's because they are better than what they had last year, which is only good news for Ted Hurst.
I assume that's why he's news to me is because I just completely wrote off that offense about halfway through the year and said, okay, they're not going to be anything. But I mean, that's surprising. I do like Cameron Brown out of Texas Tech. Like, I think he's an interesting name, but he's interesting mainly because I think he's a fun runner,
Yeah.
and he's an athletic option there. So I'll be interested to see what that offense looks like. I think quarterback selection for them will dictate what that offense does. But clearly, I mean, looking through Hurst's game log, like putting up 7 for 128 and 2 touchdowns on Vanderbilt. Granted, they're Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt was better last year.
Oh yeah.
Uh, 7 for 91 against Connecticut, 9 for 173 against Arkansas State. So yeah, that's egg on me. That's expensive egg on my face. That was there, but
Hey,
um,
cheap in drafts right now. So
yeah, right. So uh, with that note there, I mean, I would say that I like all three of those wide receivers. And Nick Anderson, health is really the only issue why he's not going higher than he is, and why he hasn't been productive. But that's a significant knock, health. So I get that too.
oh, for sure. You kind of mentioned the Bauer Sharp thing as well, and I agree that like I'd rather have Trey Green probably 10 out of 10 times. Right, I think LSU is just adding him because they needed a body and they could pay him better than Oklahoma could. Like people will say like, oh, but he led Oklahoma, a SEC team, in receiving last year. I'm like, well, that's great. I think my 8-year-old niece could have led them in receiving, given the fact they're given their options. Like even as Oklahoma's leading receiver, like his production was awful, man. Like he finished his tight end 40, finished it with just 324 yards and 2 touchdowns. His yards per catch was 7.7. His ADOT was 5. His yards per route run was almost below 1. To be fair, nobody on Oklahoma had a good yards per route run last year, but like still, like this isn't a guy that's like just saying it like it is. He's not a super talented guy. Trey Green is a absolute freak of nature, right? Like he's a touchdown machine. He broke all the year 1-0 thresholds last year. He's a freak of an athlete. He plays basketball for LSU as well. Like Trey Green, I think, is like a dude that can mismatch against other SEC opponents versus like Bauer Sharp. It was literally, as Chris K would say, just a tallest midget competition at
I do think there's
Oklahoma.
a little bit, yeah, I think there's a little bit to be said too about LSU's wide receiving room being a little bit in flux. That they like the idea of having flexibility of running two tight end sets
Mm-hmm.
with Sharp and Trey Green. So I think there's validity. I think he was brought in for legitimate reasons, and I think that he's good at his role. Um, and you don't have to be a world beater to be a successful tight end. You just have to be productive and be able to be on the field. But yeah, at 10 times out of 10, Trey Green, more exciting, more athletic, better option at tight end.
So as we kind of finish this up here, Ethan, just kind of get some final thoughts. Here's my deal. There are so many quarterbacks, in my opinion, that in previous years would have gone off in this draft, and it just shows how deep the quarterback position is this year. Like I'm going to name names: Bryson Barnes at Utah State, Jaden Mayava at USC. Haynes King didn't come off the board, I don't think, in this draft.
I
Or
think he did.
no, he did. You're right. You're right. Haynes King. Caden Hauser, East Carolina quarterback, after his phenomenal second half of the season, somehow didn't come off in this draft. Brennan Sorsby, I think, did come off.
Yep, he was.
Yes, 7th round. But Diego Pavia, he didn't come off the board. You're talking about top 20 quarterback from last year. Owen McCowan, nowhere to be found in here. Gio Lopez, South Alabama. Marcel Reed, he was top 20 second half of the season. Austin Simmons replacing Jackson Dart, like Eli Holstein. Like,
Yeah, good option.
like it gets in. Thomas Castellanos, a Gus Malzahn dual threat quarterback, did not come off in this draft. Like that's, and here's the thing: I look at every one of these quarterbacks, and I cannot fault any of them being really taken over guys like that.
Okay.
Like that's just kind of the crazy thing of how deep this quarterback room is. Versus like running back, I'm like, ooh, there's some again, there's some names I think should have gone. Like you seen Willis out of Syracuse, I think should have gone. I like Arnold Barnes at Tulane this year. Robert Henry at UTSA. Dylan Carson at Air Force. I'm surprised nobody went after Jam Miller at Alabama as well. Emmett Johnson, Nebraska. He was on fire to end the season there with his volume. And the wide receivers, I'm trying to think. Let's see. CJ Daniels out of Miami. I'm surprised nobody took a shot on him. Evan Stewart out of Oregon. We touched on him earlier, but I'm surprised nobody took a shot on him. Ian Strong out of Rutgers. Junior Vandeross at Toledo.
Yeah.
Like lots of great names that just still somehow didn't make it into this 9-round draft. What about you, Ethan? You got any names off the top of your head that you're surprised didn't come out of this draft?
Halen Green at
Oh yeah, good
quarterback,
call.
a guy who I was kind of shocked to not see off the board. He's the only one that really I felt, even across like most positions, that I felt, hey, like he probably could have gone, 2 or 3 rounds before the end of in there. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of guys that I think it creates like a really interesting concept for drafting, and like draft theory is going to be really important, I think, heading into this year. So many times we look at drafts as how can I build my best team?
Hmm.
And like that's always the goal, is building your best team. The best team that you can build in February is not going to be the best team in August.
No.
And part of like rolling the dice and trying to project into the future is being okay with risk and being okay with your roster not feeling warm and fuzzy at the end of the draft,
Hmm.
especially early in spring. So when we're seeing all of these, running backs go really early, it's a great opportunity. I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, um, to kind of zag from the common game plan of going running back early, and just hitting on some of the guys that have variance and hoping that variance hits your way. Um, that allows you to kind of go after and target some of these wide receivers that we feel better about. Jeremiah Smith, Antonio Williams, like if you can get a guy like Mosley or Ashlock. I think we talked to Cam Coleman, to Eric McAllister if your
Hmm.
name's Jared. You can go after him and have some guys who you see have that high range of outcomes. You might not feel warm and fuzzy about starting Cedric Baxter as like your running back two, or like Chip Trianum as your running back one or two going into the end of the draft here. But I think it's going to allow you, the variance at running back is so much more reliable than it is at running back, or than it is at wide receiver, just because you have fewer bodies there that are playing on like in the game.
Hmm.
Running backs are, it's a flat, it's flatter at wide receiver than it is at running back because you have the distribution. You can be a wide receiver three on a team and still have a great game and
Yep.
and pop off, but it's not going to be as reliable and consistent. Those running backs, if you end up seeing the field, you're going to be much better than a peripheral option at wide receiver. And getting those guys later at the running back position is going to just help your case, and give your roster and your team room to grow as that offseason continues. So I think that's something I'm going to be toying around with as I get into draft mode and start looking at some drafts, is trying to really be okay with the fact that I'm not saying completely fade the running back position early, because that's wild, especially opportunity with some of these great names at the top. Um, but I'm not going to try and stack, I know it's a popular thing to try and get like three of your top four rounds, filling them with wide receivers, or I'm sorry, with running backs. I know that's a popular build construction. Um, but I think it's a year to kind of toy around with things and get a little funky, go receiver heavy,
Oh yeah.
um, and have some fun with it.
I would definitely agree. And like my thought is like, all right, what would I be looking at if I wasn't doing the running back early? Because again, I'm telling you right now, like I'm looking at just one of my best balls right now. And I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams who took running back as their first two picks. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 12 teams took two running backs with their first three picks. So again, you're 100% right. There is room to try to zag and take some advantage here. In one of the best balls here, we have one team here from 863 Kane. He went four wide receivers early. He went Ryan Williams, Emmett Mosley, Antonio Williams, Evan Stewart. And then he attacked running back. He went Caden Durham out of LSU, Jaden Baugh out of Florida, Cam Cook out of Jacksonville State, Jordan Lyle and Mark Fletcher out of Miami. That's what I would probably do, is
Yeah.
I would identify, because I usually take about 10 running backs in a 30-round draft, right? I would probably, one, because of how good quarterback feels this year, I go for about 5, 6 quarterbacks. I might even try like a 4 quarterback build, especially if
Yeah.
it's a 1 quarterback best ball, and try to just take more shots at running back. And I would identify like 3 or 4 rooms that I am very okay with just taking multiple shots on, right? Think about the Boise State room, right? Take a shot on Malik Sherrod and Sire Gaines, or Breezy Dubar, or like whoever you want to take a shot on in that room, right? take a look or take a shot at what's another running back room, or the Memphis running back room, right? Take a shot on take a shot on Sutton Smith, take a shot on Rashad Amos, right? Just take 2 shots at the running back room that you know for a fact is going to be great for CFF. Depending on where CJ Campbell ends up, right? Like take a shot on both him and Antoine Raymond, probably in that, that round 5-10 range, if that's where those guys end up falling and stuff like that. Like, I think that's the way I would probably go about doing that. And then, like you said, that kind of opens up for, if you feel worse about taking shots on value at receiver later, you can go after guys. Like, you can start with a build of like Ryan Williams, Deion Burks at the end of the first and second round.
Yeah.
Again, just me, myself, and I'm personally more okay with taking shot at receiver later because I already know how variable that position is in general, right? Because like looking at last year, your top end running backs are scoring. Where am I? I gotta find the right value. There we go. So your top end running backs, RB12 was 256. RB1, obviously Ashton Jeanty, 422, versus your top end wide receivers here, right? Just a reminder again, RB12 was 256, wide receiver 12, 205. Right. So like I personally am okay with going after running back, finding solidified options there because those solidified options will end up getting me more than like a solidified wide receiver. And then I can take shots on wide receiver later because that's going to change week to week as well. But as Ethan's kind of postulating here, as this end of show is kind of turned into, like if you want to go a different direction, I think you have to just identify rooms that you're going to attack aggressively.
Yeah. I mean, it's mitigating risk by going and attacking a specific room. So it definitely makes a lot of sense there as a way to kind of balance things out. If you are, you're basically saying I'm going to the reason why these running backs aren't going earlier is because there is that risk, and you're willing to say, okay, I'm just going to kind of narrow my high end potential and limit having 2 guys with those picks and just solidifying the room and ensuring you get one. If you're willing to get weird with roster construction, like you said, 4 quarterbacks instead of 5, or maybe rostering 1 less tight end, like it makes sense because that spot can be used and get the benefit of locking down a room. So I'm right there with you.
It's kind of interesting, and I think you guys touched on this as well, like with the underdog best balls, especially. Like I know you're talking about like 1 tight end builds, 2 tight end builds. Like normally I go for about 4 tight ends in a 30-round draft for CFF. This year I think I'm going to play around with like just a 3 tight end build, even maybe if I'm being crazy, like 2 tight end builds, because I'm kind of thinking to myself with just how variable tight ends are. Like, what is the benefit of having that 4th tight end there, right? When on average, most of those weeks, he's going to get you 5 points if you're lucky, right? Like
we talked about that this past week, and like obviously there's some differences with Power 4 versus like the entire college football landscape at your disposal. But the big thing that we noticed was like tight ends, I believe we said only give you about an 8 point per week swing. So on those 2 bye weeks, you're really only limiting your total upside for like your score by the end of the year by 16 points if your guy stays healthy. Obviously, a 20-round draft is a lot different than a 30-round draft that we typically get with Fantrax, but it's worth playing around with because I do think that a lot of times we need to be attacking a less fragile construction of our team, and we have to assume that we're right on a lot of these things, and assuming you're right is only going to maximize your ceiling for all of these teams. So it's really interesting. If you're interested in that kind of discussion, go and check out the first 2 episodes of Ballin' with My Bestie, because we tackle all that stuff and like I said, kind of look at the archetypes for what kind of players you want to go after, and that helps not only in Power 4 with these underdog contests, but on Fantrax as well, as we have more players, but it still helps you find the right kind of guy to take down a league.
Oh yeah, I highly recommend going and check out Ballin' with My Bestie. Available now over on the Campus Canton podcast feed. Again, Ethan and Chris K do a fantastic job with that. It'll be a weekly listen for me as well, because again, like Ethan said, a lot of that stuff that they talk about applies here as well. It's not exactly 1-to-1 because of just the size of the player pool we have, but it is really, really good stuff. They do great work over there. Besides that, Ethan, you got anything else you want to tell the people about, things you're working on? Obviously, we are working on the supplemental player guides for the freshman supplemental guide for the campus of Canton. We're going to be hitting those hard here pretty much in the next week, getting those ready for that guide. Anything else you got going on?
I've got an article coming out on wide receiver archetypes to look for over on Campus to Canton. I believe they have that under the gaming feed for all of your DFS content. That is going to look at, again, primarily underdog, but it's a pretty much an evergreen piece of content that will show you what kind of wide receivers are going to play best in the half PPR scoring that underdog uses. Beyond that, I'm super excited for these guides. This is my favorite time of year to be able to start jumping in on those guides that Campus Canton pumps out. They're always, a ton of work, but really fun to start breaking down teams and getting into the minutia of the college football season and starting to listening in on camps and kind of the news and the movers and shakers that we get through, March, April, May. They're a ton of fun. As mentioned at the top of the show, you can find me on Blue Sky at Ethan Sauers. I am hoping to get some more college football content coming out over there. Be able to be a place where if people aren't loving what they're interacting with over on Twitter, I know it's tough to make the jump, but I've loved Blue Sky and I'm a firm supporter in checking it out if you haven't already.
Yeah, tons of fun. A lot of great stuff coming out. Ethan, appreciate you coming on here. With that, we've come to the end of our show. Appreciate all of you guys out there for listening. If you have not already, make sure you leave a like, a comment, and a subscribe. If you're watching this on the YouTube side of things, if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show. Leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you check out the rest of the Campus of Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here. I won't say next Monday because actually I'll be taking a week off here to take care of some stuff at the house here. But until we get back, next up, we are going to be discussing some of the coaching changes in the Power 4 and G5. You can already imagine some of the people will be getting on to help us out with that. But until then, appreciate all of you guys and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.